Where was I on September 11th? I was at the Pizza Hut building off campus in an antenna design class. We were on break and we heard the news of a plane hitting the building, and we watched as the second plane hit the building. And what does it mean to me? Hatred. People use hatred to gain power, justify positions, stay in power, and they twist religions and their economic conditions to blame somebody else for their own issues. And it's pretty sad that we haven't evolved in 2,000 years.
Where was I on 9/11? I was in my second month of a one-year detail at NASA headquarters. And after the plane hit the Pentagon, several friends of mine and I went up to the roof of NASA headquarters, and we could see the Pentagon burning. It's about 1.5 miles away from NASA headquarters in DC. And there were several military aircraft in what is typically a no-fly zone. At the time, there were rumors that there were bombs on the mall and that a car at the State Department had been blown up. So it was a very terrifying situation. On my way to the metro later on in the day, I passed several armed military police, armed guards on every corner. And so it was like living in a war zone. What does it mean to me? Lost safety. We as Americans can never again, in America, take our safety for granted.
At my former employer, we were watching a news feed coming over our computer, saw that the first plane had hit. My coworker who used to work in DC, she yelled, "Oh my God." We went down to see what had happened, and the other plane had hit. My boss, who was coming back from Taiwan, was rerouted. He called in to say, "What's going on?" And I said, "We're under terrorist attack." He did not get back home for a week.
Wow.
Where
were you on 9/11?
I was taking a Java course over in 142.
And what?
And I was walking by the monitors and saw that the plane had gone into it, and so everybody was standing outside the monitors. And then we ended class. I think they let us go by noon or something. So.
And what did it mean to you?
Well, initially it was. I just thought it was a rogue plane that went into the building, and then it became clear pretty quick that it was. Then it was kind of. I remember being like, I was wondering if they were going to actually fly the plane into one of these buildings, because that's what was. Remember that as they were talking, they were saying there's 50 planes in the air ready to come hit places. So as everybody was lined up to go out, I remember kind of having that eerie feeling that planes were going to start coming from the air. But.
Where were you on 9/11?
I was actually over in the 333 High Bay doing a mission simulation for a laminar slip process for CM2.
LSP.
Yes. And what did it mean to you when the planes hit?
We didn't even actually know the planes had hit. We were in there testing, there's no phones in there, and we had somebody actually call us and say, "Go look at a monitor, there's something going on." It was just kind of crazy. It was unrealistic. You couldn't believe it was happening. So.
I was in Building 86 here and just working on my work, and I walked downstairs by the TV, and I saw on the TV there was the buildings. One of the buildings was on fire, and there was a bunch of people, and I thought, wow, what's going on? And then shortly, you got calls from like my brother, and very concerned, and it just really put a lot of kind of made you very uneasy or panicking, kind of almost not really panicking, but you just made you very concerned. And so what it means to me is it's all of a sudden now we're in the terror, worldwide terror, just like the rest of the world.
So where were you on September 11th, 2001? At the time, I was a junior in high school, and I didn't know it when it was going on, but I was probably during a lunch break. And after lunch, I went to my next class, which was chemistry class. And a friend of mine told me about it, and I didn't believe him at first. He's kind of someone that reads a lot of fiction books, and it was something up his alley. I thought he was just telling me about something he read, and no one believed him. And then the teacher came in and was wheeling in a TV and plugged it in and told us everything that happened, and we sat there and watched the news of the events. So I was in chemistry class in high school.
And then what did it mean to you?
At the time, it didn't really mean much. I didn't have any family in the Washington, D.C. area, New York, or Pennsylvania. So it was just very shocking and didn't believe it. But it means a little more to me now because my wife's family has a cousin that was working in the Pentagon on that day. And a friend of mine who's now a civil engineer has worked on the foundation for the new buildings. And it means a little more to me now to have more of a direct connection.
Where were you on September 11th, 2001?
I was in the 6th grade at my old middle school, and I first heard about it during lunch, and some kid told me that the Pentagon was attacked, and I didn't even know at that time what the Pentagon was because I was only 11 years old.
And what did it mean to you?
I was pretty confused. My school actually decided not to tell anybody until they got home, so that their parents could tell them. My parents showed me the videos on the TV and everything, and I was pretty confused about what was going on, and I was pretty young still.
Okay. Where were you on September 11th, 2001?
I'm at home.
And what were you doing?
I think I get ready to work. Yeah, you know, take care of the kids. So.
Where was home at?
Actually, it's in California. I think that's probably early morning time there. So.
And what did it mean to you?
I mean, when I see the TV, the smoke on the building, and it's just shocking. And then.
Okay. Say that last part over again.
Yeah, I said, you know, it's think back. It's like 10 years. It's just crazy, unbelievable.
Where were you on September 11th, 2001?
I was at work.
What were you doing?
Working.
When did you find out about it?
Not immediately. When they were running reruns. I was just too busy to have something like CNN open while I'm trying to get work done.
What did it mean to you?
What did it mean to me? At the time, right before I had just gotten tickets to go meet a woman over in Ukraine, she had told me that after this occurred that, you know, if I didn't make that journey in January, it'd be fine. Well, I went anyway, barring terrorist attacks and all such, and married her. So, and we're married still. That's what it meant to me, I guess. Just another glitch. You can stop anything.
Right. Where were you on September 11th, 2001?
I was in a meeting with a big team there, and somebody at that time when it happened, somebody came in and said, "Turn on the TV, there's something." And so, you know, we turned on the TV, and when I saw it, I assumed just some airplane, you know, by mistake ran into a tower. I did not think about any terrorist. So after we hear the story from the TV, I was shocked.
And what did it mean to you?
It means that in a day that we, you know, the international terrorism is become more severe. You know, definitely we need to put a lot of, you know, security for the nation, and we have to be more cautious. You know, when we travel. When, you know, I know some of my relatives, you know, actually live in New York. They were impacted. They were working in the tower. And after hear the stories, it can impact, even it's a big impact for the nation, also impact for individual. So I think, you know, everybody, the nation, us, you know, have to be very cautious. And
Where were you on September 11th, 2001?
I was in building 60, just at work that morning. So
And what were you doing when you found out?
I was working at the computer and started seeing emails about from friends about something happening in New York City. And then a few minutes later, pretty much the entire branch, about 20 people, were sitting in the branch chief's office watching TV, watching CNN, and just wondering what was going on.
And what did it mean to you?
It was an interesting time because in the room there was a lot of fear, a lot of anger, a lot of unknowns. Why is this happening? What is happening? We started hearing rumors about DC getting hit, the Pentagon getting hit, and then just a lot of uncertainty. Things that we thought were certain no longer were. We thought security, we were safe and everything, and that was shattered. So that was probably the biggest change.
Okay. All right, where were you on September 11th, 2001?
Well, I was in college. It was my junior year, and it was still pretty early in Houston, and I woke up and I saw it on the internet, checked my email, and I went to my roommate's room and I told him about it, and he thought it was still pretty early. He thought it was just a small propeller plane, and so he kind of brushed it off, and I kind of just looked at him, and then I went to class and didn't really know what to think. We were all pretty busy with school, and so we went to class, and the professor told us to. He was actually pretty straightforward. He said that we have so many things to get done, and so we really can't talk about it, and we just have to go through the objective for the day. So we did that, and it wasn't until several hours later that we actually had a chance to sit down in our dorm as a big group and kind of absorb everything. And so I really don't know what I thought at the time. It was just happening so fast.
So where were you on September 11th, 2001?
It was in Huntsville, Alabama, at the University of Alabama, Huntsville, at a TFAS conference. It's a Thermal Fluids and Analysis Workshop. So it was being hosted by them. It was started on a Monday. It's mostly an all-week activity, and September 11th was a Tuesday that particular week. So there was a group of us from the Thermal Fluids branch at the time down there at that conference. So that's where we were, and part of that then is going to conferences for attending papers and things like that. So we were spread around up in the little rooms with maybe about 150 people were around at the time, and somebody found out about it, the activity, and then they basically put it on the large screens out there, and then different people found out about it at different times because we were in closed rooms with watching a paper, and people just wouldn't come in and break it. But basically the whole mood then became very somber, and we sort of stopped activities for a while. But since we were there, we couldn't go anywhere because all the planes were grounded and stuff like this. We decided to go ahead and continue the conference for the following days. And so we stayed there till then. And it was really neat because then you have the issue, well, now what do you do? Your family's back here in Cleveland and we're down there. We had a rental car, which was nice. So it was like a valuable resource at the time. And we ended up driving all the way back, staying overnight just outside, I think, Lexington, Kentucky, and coming back up the following day. Rental cars were like a very valuable commodities. There was no activity in the skies. It was very quiet. There were no contrails. So the skies were clearer than usual, very quiet everywhere. There was a Black Hawk helicopter by the airport. So that was interesting too. But that's essentially where we were, very somber, and just we managed to get through the conference because they just had no other choice.
What did it mean to you?
It was sad. I already had a tough year that year, but it was sad. But maybe since I'm older, it wasn't unexpected necessarily because they've tried before, and it just by being able to see it on TV, then you understand it. If you had no visuals, it'd have been much more difficult to understand. But the fact that it was a commercial plane versus a military plane that went in indicated it was going to be a smaller effort. So from that viewpoint, that's how I interpreted it. It's like, gee, I didn't think the things would fall down. That was the most interesting part, I guess, as being an engineer, to actually see them crumple that's very disheartening. Very, very much. That's it, pretty much.
Okay. Where were you on September 11th, 2001?
I was at work right here, building 250.
Okay.
Room 250, building 86.
What were you doing?
I was actually working at the time. I had earphones on, so I heard when the first one hit, and that caught my attention, so I got on the Fox News.
And then what did it mean to you?
What did it mean to me? Well, as the day developed, my daughter and her husband and 3 kids were at Disney World, and he is Muslim. And my concern went to them because as the day developed and there were no flights, they were supposed to fly home that day. So that's where my concern was.
Do you have any other thoughts?
Do I have any other thoughts? It was a terrible thing. That's my thought.
Okay. Where were you on September 11th, 2001?
I was in building 14 and in the manufacturing area, and I remember the plane that had to land here because we could see it because building 14 is right by the runway.
Mm-hmm. So then how did you react, or what did it mean to you?
Oh, well, we had to go because we had to start, once they gave the okay to let everybody go, we had to go through building 14, and I also came down to building 50 and make sure everybody was out, because I was one of the last with Jim Wagner, and we had to say everybody was out of the building.
So then what does it mean to you?
What, well, I mean, obviously it's a traumatic thing of seeing all that destruction, and it was just, when we first did it, it was very kind of, I guess the word would be surreal, to drive home and think like all this is happening and then see it on the TV for the days after. So.
And then I got to the rental car counter, and that rental car counter, the line was at least 2 hours long to get a car. So, but I stood in line anyway. And as I was in line probably for about a half hour, I heard someone yelling, "Hey, does anyone need a ride to Cleveland?" And it just so happened that there were 4 Continental Airline employees who had been in Atlanta and were on their way and needed to get back to Cleveland, and they had gotten a car, but it was much bigger than they needed, so they offered someone a ride. And so at first I naturally said, "Hey, definitely I'll take that ride." At this point I said, "I'm definitely going back home." And so I took that ride. It was 4 folks, 4 of the nicest folks from the Cleveland area. They worked out here at the Hopkins Airport, and we had a 12-hour drive with strangers. They knew, some of them knew each other. I knew none of them, but I got to know them on the way back, and we kind of formed a bond through that trip because of that common thread of having all gone through this together on this 12-hour ride. So for me, what it meant to me was kind of pulling of people together, pulling together of the nation. It was very symbolic. That trip back was very symbolic for me that, hey, we all learned, the events unfolded. I mean, it was like, it took days for everything to try to get pieced together, but for us on that trip back, all of us were obviously thinking about our families. All of us desperately wanted to get back to home, because I have 3 kids, and they were all in school, and middle and high school, and I was concerned that, hey, are they okay? Do they understand what's going on? And so I had a lot of communication with my wife during that trip back. But it was, so the symbolism for me was, hey, people pulled together, the nation pulled together, and this was no different. There were 2 women, 2 men, and, I mean, plus myself on this trip, and again, not knowing each other from Adam, we decided, hey, we're gonna pull together. We're gonna get back. We're gonna make it back to Cleveland, and we're gonna drive on that if it takes us to get there. So it was something I'll never forget, and it was very something my kids will always remember as well. So.
Hang on, it's got to focus. All right. Where were you on September 11th, 2001?
I was actually a junior in high school still, so I was in calculus class.
And how did you find out?
So I think there was an announcement over the loudspeakers in school, and then they ended up putting up the news feed on the TV, and we kind of watched that during the rest of the day. So.
What did it mean to you?
I mean, I was just in shock at first, but it was just really scary, and didn't think something like that could happen. So.
Okay, on September 11th, I was working out at Plumbrook, and I remember listening to the radio on the way in about an accidental plane hitting a tower. And after I got there, we all went down to the Plumbrook chief's office. It was Bob Kozar at the time, and he had a TV in his office, and we watched events unfold from there. Some of us called family. A few people went home. Most of us were stunned for that day.
So what did it mean to you?
It meant a lot of things. One comment I remember, and it came from an ex-military person, was it was kind of interesting. It wasn't what I expected from him. He said, you poke a tiger in the eye enough times with a stick, he's going to swat back at you sooner or later, which I thought was kind of interesting. I've been in the towers, so I remembered all the people, so seeing them come down, that was the picture. That's what stuck with me on it, was the picture of having been there and what they must have been going through. And the loss is what stuck with me.
You want to tell me about where you were on 9/11?
I was upstairs working with, I think it was Fraser, and I didn't even know, but when I walked by the cubicles, I saw a couple of people get together, and then they were watching the TV, so that's how I found out. And then later on, we get the warning that we have to leave the lab, so I took off.
How were you feeling that day?
I was very angry. I went home, and I guess I was very upset. I couldn't do anything, and so I was upset for the whole couple days, I guess. The next day we got the day off, and I felt like I had to do something, so I went to the Salvation Army and volunteered for a couple hours, to better use my time. But yeah, I was very upset.
Hi.
Where were you on 9/11?
I was in the lobby on the first floor of this building.
And what did you think when you first started hearing what was happening?
I thought it was really bad, awful. I thought, a new war would break out after it happened, which it did.
Anything else you want to share with us
Just
about
how
that day?
crazy the world's gotten, and how, it was surprising that people would use planes as weapons like that. I don't think the American public or even our government realized the depravity at the level of people we were dealing with. But it kind of opened our eyes and realized that anything is game.
Okay, Shannon, where were you on 9/11?
I was in middle school in my first period class, I believe. You could tell something was wrong because they made an announcement that none of the TVs were allowed to be turned on, and none of the teachers were allowed to tell you what was going on either. And a couple hours afterwards, one of my teachers just decided to tell us, and we got out of school early that day.
What was going through your mind when you heard that?
I guess shock would be the emotion I was feeling. You don't usually expect something like that to happen on U.S. soil, and all of the parents were pretty upset about it.
Would you like to share your thoughts on 9/11?
Sure. I was on my way into work that morning, and normally I didn't listen to the radio, but I had the radio on that morning and heard as the attack was happening on the second tower, and just again was in shock. When I got to work, I came into the back gate and they were not letting anybody in, and I asked the guard, you know, what was going on. They weren't saying anything, and I finally asked, do I need to go around to the front gate? And he told me that no, nobody was coming in and nobody was leaving the NASA Center. So I turned around to go home, and on the way home tried to call in to my boss and see what was going on here at NASA Glenn. And of course nobody was at their desks to answer the phone because everybody was looking at the television set. So I just ended up at home watching it on TV for the rest of the day, and found out that I was one of the lucky ones to not make it onto the lab that day, since most of the people that were here were in a big traffic jam on the way out. There was also the added concern here at Glenn with the plane that turned around over Cleveland and went down in Pennsylvania. They were still believing at that time that there was a plane at the airport on the ground here, and that there might still be some danger. So it was I told the younger kids at that time that I felt it was the most significant event that had happened in my lifetime, which included landing on the moon and the death of President Kennedy. And you know, at the time it felt like it was even bigger than those things. I don't know, maybe the moon landing would still be on top, but it was pretty big, and the younger kids didn't seem to have that perspective.
Working. I was unaware of it until after the second plane crashed, and someone told me. But I was busy working and wasn't all that concerned about it.
What did you feel after it all happened?
I was trying to figure out what happened, you know, why it was happening. I just remember the traffic jam, trying to get out of here, and why they weren't directing traffic to help us. If it was such an urgent thing for us to leave, why they weren't directing traffic to help us leave. No, I don't know. That's about it.
I get to know the question before I'm on camera.
Where were you on 9/11?
I was in my 8th grade history class, and when it had happened, we had heard from other teachers in the school what was going on, and we had TVs in each classroom, so the teachers went ahead and turned on the TV after it had all happened, so it was mainly news coverage, but just to see that was just really shocking from the perspective of being in grade school and not really understanding the whole global impact of it at that time.
Where were you, Brent, on 9/11?
I was in my, I think, senior technology class in high school, and when I guess my teacher heard about it, he rolled in the TV so we could watch it all happen, and it was really surreal. And then after the class was over, I went to my next class, and it seemed like nobody knew what was going on or really did anything about it, so it was kind of frustrated that all this was going on and really kind of nobody else knew what was happening or knew the significance of it. So it was an interesting time.
Rich, can you tell us where you were on 9/11?
You're such a professional at doing this. Yes, actually I was here. It was, at that time, I was the chief of the Space Project Branch, our communications project branch for SpaceCom. And from my office, I could see into Pete Vrotz's office, who was the office head, and he had his TV on. And I was on the phone because one of the people that worked for me had had major surgery the day before. And I was calling him at the hospital, and his wife answered the phone. We were talking to see how he was, how he was coming through it. And after we got that talking, I said, well, she had gotten very little sleep. I said, well, you might as well go home because nothing else is going to happen today. And then that's when everything broke loose for 9/11, and we heard everything was going on. And that was another really surreal experience. It was like, it didn't even seem, you know, it looked more like we were just watching a movie or something as we were watching stuff on the TV. And then when the word came down, we had to evacuate here and everything. And boy, that was everybody was jammed up because they closed off Brook Park Road because they weren't sure, you know, what might be happening with the airport. So everybody had to then change and go out the back, and it took a long time. And I remember I got out of line, and I thought, I'm going to go over and I'm going to park over by where the garage is and stuff over there. I just pulled over on that side. And I'm sitting there in my car, and I'm listening to the radio. And I don't know if you remember this, but there was a plane that landed at Hopkins, and they moved it over to the IX Center because they weren't sure about the plane. And I was thinking, boy, what a great place I picked to park, because now I'm closer to that plane than if I would have just stayed in line. But ultimately it all worked out, and he left. But it wasn't until I got home that I was watching TV, you really started to appreciate what the treasure was. That's when you started hearing about the people jumping to their deaths and all the things that were going on. And boy, how horrific that whole thing was. But those are my my remembrances of 9/11.
Thank you. When 9/11 happened, I was working at Marconi. This is at Lorraine Products. I worked at in the Avon plant. I was working the warehouse. At the moment that it all happened, there was a lady that ran into the warehouse saying the towers were struck by an airplane. And that was the first airplane that hit the tower, and it really didn't hit me until about the second airplane hit, and that's when they were saying that everything was gone on fire and people were jumping out of the building. And the first thing that hit me was these poor people that were up there, families, friends. But then I thought about my brother. My brother had 50 of his students. My brother's an assistant dean at Providence College. He had 50 of his students that worked at the towers as accountants. And then it hit me again. I have my ex-husband's cousin that works in the towers. It really takes your breath away just to think of all the damage that it did, not only to those that were involved, but you could be thousands and thousands of miles and still react to their pain and to the pain of those who loved ones had passed away. And we suffered a lot thinking about those and praying for those. And the sad part is I have a child at home that affected him for about 2 weeks. He kept his nose on the TV, and those were my reactions. I kept on just looking at the TV and thinking, wow, it doesn't seem like it's real. It's happening here at home, but it's not home. But still, it's here in the United States, which is my home. So that's what I remember. You know, it was an impact on all of us. Kurt, where were you on 9/11?
Alice, you mean 2010 or 2001? I'm sorry.
2001.
Okay. On 9/11, I was out at Plum Brook Station. I was at the B2 facility down in the shop with a couple of guys when a technician came in and announced that the first tower had been hit. We were kind of out in a very remote area there, and ended up heading back towards the engineering building at Plum Brook, where we later got news that the second tower had been hit. And that's when everything began.
How were you feeling that day? And like, did you head home or did you continue to work?
Well, I think we were very distracted by the events of the day. We turned on the television and saw what was happening. It was difficult to work. I think I felt, like many other people, just very uncertain about what was happening. I personally knew that something wasn't right. To have a tower or an airplane crash into a tower was one thing, but when the second one hit, I knew that
things were not right.
Brian, where were you on 9/11?
I was in high school. I attended Padua Franciscan High School, and I was at study hall. And I remember they put the news up on the TV monitors, and you know, your daily class just kind of stopped, and everybody started watching the news. And I think we had a prayer service at the end of the day, and it didn't really even hit me until I got home what was happening. So yeah, I was at school, high school.
Start with where I was on September 11th. I worked at a company called Titan Corporation in Greenbelt, Maryland, outside of Washington, D.C. So I was driving into work and heard the first report on the news. Didn't really think a whole lot, certainly other than a tragedy. Got into work, and we were all talking about it, and heard of the second plane crashing into the World Towers. And things just continued. I think I stayed at work for another hour and a half. By then, the plane had crashed into the Pentagon, and actually from our floor in our building, which is probably 20 miles north of DC, we could see smoke coming up, so we kind of felt a little bit of, you know,
reality.
It hit home. So pretty much everyone went home. So I went home that afternoon and stayed glued to the TV, and actually some neighbors and I, we were all over watching everything. Just unbelievable. Never had a feeling, hopefully never will have a feeling like that again, of how the country, how much of an impact to the country. You didn't know what was going to happen next. That was it.
Where were you on 9/11?
I was in 8th grade.
What were you doing?
I was in history class. I was learning about the American Revolution.
And what did 9/11 mean to you?
It was a shock to, I would say, our culture, and a shock to our community to be attacked like that.
It meant that the safety and security of our country was under attack and that we needed to fight back.
Where were you on 9/11?
I was on a Navajo reservation in Arizona,
What were you doing?
visiting family.
And what did it mean to you?
That 9/11 will always be a day of national sorrow, but a day when the nation pulled together.
Where were you on 9/11?
On September 11th, 2001, I was working as an engineer for Parker Hannifin in the Gas Turbine Fuel Systems Division. We were supposed to fly out. Our team was supposed to fly out from Cleveland to the West Coast, and I was getting ready to leave on an airplane, and I was picking up my laundry from the laundromat, and I had heard a plane had hit the trade centers, and I was surprised. I was thinking it must have been a small, single prop airplane. How does something like that happen? By the time I got to the office, and a couple of other people were supposed to be leaving on the flight, they said a second plane had hit the towers, and at that point we were questioning, do we actually depart for the airport, Cleveland Hopkins? Some of us wanted to push on, thinking this was kind of an isolated incident. It was kind of a very scary time to realize that something was going on that was not typical. We'll call it a terrorist event now. So the team got on a teleconference, and we decided, about 30 of us, that we would not fly that day. Then there was rumors of a third plane still being in the air, and that was probably even a scarier moment. That plane was actually turned over Cleveland and then back to Pennsylvania. The reason I remember it was on a Tuesday is my wife had called I had 2 young children at that time. Well, I still have them, but they were young at that time. They were headed to the dentist office, and my wife called panic. She was run off the road by a tractor trailer, and everyone must have, been petrified or terrified, listening to their radio and not paying attention. So she had to ditch the car into someone's front lawn. So I definitely remember that. What did it mean to me? It really was a time where we were always taught to be passive about our security and sit back and just let the process happen. But it was a time where you kind of had to take action for yourself and protect you and your family.
Okay. Okay.
On 9/11, I was in my office at work. I was just getting my day started, and a coworker came in and told me that a plane had crashed into one of the Twin Towers. Shortly thereafter, we were told to leave work and go to our loved ones or whatnot. Spent the remainder of the day with, at that time, my fiance. What 9/11 means to me is that this country is vulnerable in ways that I'd never felt before. And secondly, that the country can come together at a time of crisis like it was.
Okay, so where were you on 9/11?
I was in my living room in Fairview Park, Ohio.
What were you doing?
I was feeding my twin boys watching the Today Show when Katie Couric announced that the tower, or someone hit the tower with a small plane.
What does 9/11 mean to you?
9/11 means a change in the world to me, and more awareness of terrorism that was out there that I don't think any of us thought about. Cut. Do you remember where you were on 9/11?
Yes, I do. In fact, I was at just getting ready to go into a meeting over at Building 500 and had just driven over there. I'm sorry, you're already on.
Okay.
Do you remember where you were on September 11th?
Yes.
What were you doing? Where were you at?
I was in Building 86. I was a structural engineer in Maley House branch. Had a TV in my office. I watched the second building get hit by the airplane and crumble to the ground.
What does September 11th mean to you?
It was a tragic day in American history.
It's over by the transformer.
Do you remember where you were September 11th?
Yes, I do.
Where were you at?
I was in the fab shop.
What do you remember about that day?
I remember watching one plane crash into one of the towers, and I watched, and then I seen the second plane crash into the tower. Then I actually seen the towers fall. I thought it was devastating. To see so many people get killed and families. I actually seen a person jump out of the one of the buildings, which was, that means they have to spend a lot of heat, for a person to actually take his own life to jump out of a building. I thought it was very tragic.
What does September 11th mean to you?
It means to me that we're blessed to be here, and I think that we all should be thankful that America's blessed. That's it.
Do you remember what you were doing on September 11th?
Yeah, I was working second shift, so that day I was driving in town. I bought a house to buy and resell, so I was on my way down to 480 when I heard it on the radio. And when I got there, then I had a guy working for me. He came, and then 2 or 3 of my friends working the trades, and everything shut down. They came and over the front house, and there's 5 or 6 of us just standing there, and we all realized, we looked up, there was no airport traffic at all, and planes usually drive, go back and forth above the house, and none of us, it was all uncertain, it was something that no one had ever experienced. So we it was the first time that we realized that we had taken our freedoms for granted here, or taken our national security for granted.
What does September 11th mean to you?
It means the end of America's innocence for a whole generation, for them to actually appreciate what they had that they took for granted previous to that.
What were you doing on September 11th?
I was in my office in Building 86, and I remember my secretary called me up and said a plane had hit the World Trade Center, and I had thoughts that it was a small plane, and I just couldn't have imagined the magnitude that unfolded within the next half an hour.
What does September 11th mean to you?
I think it means that it's the end to a complacency we had in this country, and took a lot of freedoms for granted that you just can't take for granted.
Okay, do you remember where you were on 9/11?
Yes, I do. In fact, I was headed over to a meeting over in Building 500, and I heard on the radio that a small plane had hit the World Trade Center. And the first thing is, I'm thinking, well, it got to be a little Cessna plane or something. Didn't think much about it. Shut off the car, walked into the building, started having the meeting, and normally we had several people at the meeting, but there was only 2 of us sitting in there. And then finally, one of the guys that were in Building 500 actually came down and goes, "What are you guys doing? You're still meeting? How can you not be looking at it?" And go, "What's going on?" "The second plane has hit the thing." And, "Well, how big is the plane?" "These are big planes." And so went down, watched everything on television. I remember sitting around in the parking lot trying to get out of here while they had the one plane over at Hopkins. They was concerned that there was explosives or something on that plane. Then just going home and coming back the next day because everything was supposed to go back to normal, but the center was closed, so they sent me back home. And I sat around watching TV for the next day. Finally got to the point where I was building a brick mailbox at the time, and I actually, when we finally found out we weren't going to be coming to work for a couple of days, I said I'm going to go finish this because I felt that was kind of, they went and knocked things down. I wanted to build something to kind of, and so that's, my mailbox is kind of my tribute to September 11th.
That's great. What does 9/11 mean to you?
A failure of our government to protect our borders, really.
Okay, do you remember where you were on 9/11 and what you were doing?
That was my first day of being at the fitness center, and I was on a treadmill, and they happened to have a TV running, and I saw the building burning, and didn't think anything of it at first until it got more in depth, and then it's like total disbelief. You can't believe that it's really happening.
And what does 9/11 mean to you?
Well, I think it changed America forever from being innocent and not even thinking much about the rest of the world to now you have to be on guard at all times.
Okay. Do you remember 9/11 and what it means to you? I'm sorry, and what you were doing. Do you remember 9/11 and where you were that day?
That day, I was in Building 14 in the tool crib, and there was a television right outside the tool crib, and I believe Walt Wozniak came out and said, "Turn on the TV," and everybody was watching as everything happened, as everything went down.
And what does 9/11 mean to you today?
It means to me that we have to be more aware that we're not safe in America. We can